Hi class, I hear from my friend, which is your professor, that you are interested in social science. Um, that is really great because social science is very, very, very interesting. Whenever you hear the word ology, it means the study of. So anthropology is the study of humans because the word anthro comes from the Greek word anthropos, which means human beings. So the study of human beings. Okay, psychology is the study of your psyche. So, yeah, psychology. So if you have problems mentally, then you would see a psychiatrist or, you know. Um, Sociology is the study of human social interactions and human society and how it works. If you take an anthropology class or a sociology class, you will hear the term race and ethnicity. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you briefly about race and ethnicity. When I was a first year student, I thought that race and ethnicity is the same thing. However, now I know that it is different in many ways, but there is still a strong connection. So, what is ethnicity? So, from my anthropology class, I learned that anthropologists and sociologists has many definitions for the term ethnicity. The dictionary definition, however, for ethnicity is a particular ethnic affiliation or group. So as first year students, you're like, well, that doesn't really help because now it's like, what's ethnic group? So the dictionary definition for ethnic group is a large group of people classified according to common racial, national, tribal, religious, or linguistic background. Okay, so now what's the difference between race and ethnicity? For my lecture class again, in the 1950s, social scientist says that an ethnic group is defined by culture and language, and race is biological. Let me think of an example. So, in terms of race, according to the 1950s, biological wise, my mom is from China, my dad's from Vietnam. So technically, I would be Vietnamese and Chinese. However, I was born and raised in America. So when you relate that to ethnicity, it's kind of like I identify my culture as like the American culture, but also my Asian culture. It gets a little bit difficult to explain. So let me explain some characteristics of ethnicity. So in this book that we're reading, it's called, well, it's backwards, but Exotic No More. It's edited by Jeremy McClancy. In the chapter by a man named Richard Jenkins, he says that there's two different characteristics of ethnicity. And one of the characteristics is situational variability. And in the chapter he says, Richard Jenkins says, quote, I may be able to emphasize this or the facet of my identity depending upon what is to my advantage. Now, let me think of an example of that also. So let's see, back then when things were, he's saying that you can identify yourself depending on which one is better for you. So I'm just gonna make up an example. So like, let's say back then when there was still racism, well actually there is still racism now, but it was worse back then with African Americans and white people. So let's say if there was a person who was half African American and half white, and the example that Jenkins gives, saying that he can identify to whichever will give him the advantage, I would say that that person at that time would most likely identify themselves as white, so that way they would have more advantages than identifying themselves as African Americans for that time. Not now, but for that time. Okay, and then the other characteristic is the flexibility of ethnicity. So again from the book, he says ethnicity that it may be negotiable and flexible from one situation to another, but this is not the only thing that we learn. Depending on cultural context and social situations, ethnicity may be not negotiable. An example of that would be if you guys take a history class, you will learn about the Pearl Harbor incident. So for Pearl Harbor, people from Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and at that time, the people, in America was upset and scared and whatever they were feeling. Pretty much anybody that looked Japanese, who had Japanese descendants or anything like that, they were all thrown into a concentration camp. Even people who have been here for like 2 or 3 generations, who consider themselves, like me, like Americans, but they are Japanese Americans, who never even been to Japan, they were also thrown into the concentration camp. And even people who, Japanese Americans who was in our army, because they're Americans, they were also thrown into the concentration camp. But that's a whole nother story. Point is, because of the color of their, their skin or their race or ethnicity, they were categorized as the people who might be related to people who bombed, whatever. So lastly, there is a really, really cool website you guys should check out. It's called Race, Are We So Different? My favorite thing about this website is it's user-friendly, which means it's easy to use. If you click on the history tab, that's one of my favorites. It shows you the time, like the year and the date of when things happen. And then the lived experience tab is really cool also. Another thing that I like on that website is there's a section at the bottom that says for kids ages 10 to 13, so it's easier for them to understand about race also. Let's see. Okay, so thank you for giving me your undivided attention. I hope you understand a little bit more about social science and learned a little bit about race and ethnicity. But when you guys take more classes on it, you'll learn more in depth about really what it is and what's the big differences and similarities. I just scratched the surface pretty much. Thank you.